Hi, my name is Aubrey Martin with Martin Family Real Estate Group at Keller Williams, and this is part 3 of our educational series. I'm very, very excited to chat today with Vince Kingston over at Guild Mortgage. He is going to be chatting with us about something that comes up in every class that I teach and almost every conversation that I have in the real estate market, which is, are there down payment assistance programs available for those that need it? So Vince, thank you so much for joining us today. It's really a pleasure. You're sort of the king of the down payment assistance program. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Ari, for having me. Appreciate it.
So talk to me a little bit. You're based in Oregon. Are you just licensed just in Oregon or?
Oregon and Washington, and
Okay.
both states have their separate down payment assistance programs.
So because my target folks are mostly in Oregon, we'll stick to the Oregon programs.
Okay.
And you and I have worked together on some of these as well. Why don't you tell me a little bit about the programs that are available, the ones that are most popular, and sort of what those parameters look like?
Sure. So first of all, not all programs are geared necessarily towards down payment assistance. So what I'd like to start with is a program called the Oregon Bond. It's kind of our premier first-time homebuyer program in the state of Oregon. And it can be combined with down payment assistance, which I'll weave into in just a second. But what it does primarily, it addresses affordability with one of its options. And then the other option addresses closing cost assistance, because a lot of first-time home buyers are shocked to find out that closing costs can equal almost the amount of a down payment. So they need to be prepared for that. So what the Oregon Bond does is it gives you one of two options. The first option is called the rate advantage, which gives you a deeply below market interest rate. That's currently 2.125% 30-year fix. So that addresses the affordability part of the equation. The other option is called the cash grant, and that still gives you a nice interest rate, especially if you don't have preferred credit. It's 2.875 right now, 30-year fix, but it also gives you a cash grant to cover most closing costs. Not every penny, but it'll cover about 75% of closing costs. Will save you about $5,000 to $6,000 on our average purchase price in the Portland area. So that's the Oregon Bond. The Oregon Bond can be combined with another program, for instance, called MAP 100% financing. And what this program does is it takes a community funded second combined with the Oregon Bond first mortgage. Now that sounds a little fancy, but that's just a way to avoid mortgage insurance and get this below market interest rate and or closing cost assistance and no mortgage insurance. So there's really no other way to get a lower payment with no money down than that MAP program. And that can be a great option as well.
And is that statewide, the map?
That is primarily the Tri-County area. That's a great question. So it's primarily the Tri-County area and then Clark County, and strangely Clark County in Washington.
So one of the things that's been interesting in the real estate market is it's incredibly competitive, right? As we all know. Portland Metro prices are up 19% over this time last year. Bend market is over 35% from this time last year. So what we're seeing here is a lot of competition, especially in those starter home markets, because when you have interest rates that are low and you have a vastly underbuilt supply, now you're talking about an enormous amount of competition for the same houses. And one thing that's been very challenging from the real estate side is the ability to get offers accepted if there are any seller concessions. And by seller concessions, for those of you who don't know, it means sellers are not really willing in most cases to be paying for buyers' closing costs as they had in the past. So buyers really have very, very little leverage in this market. And one of the things that I love about something like Oregon Bond is we're not asking the sellers for anything. This is a program that is really above and beyond what anything that the seller would have to do. It's really just about the program and the borrower, and those offers can still be very strong.
Correct. Absolutely. So Oregon Bond helps us accomplish that goal, and or combined with a MAP helps us do so. Another thing I'd mention is we have a different 100% financing program that's FHA based. And that can be important for people who don't have perfect credit, because sometimes some of these other down payment assistance programs and or 100% financing tend to have very strict credit score requirements, meaning higher credit score requirements, and very low or limiting debt to income ratio requirements. And so meaning something may be wonderful on paper, but if we can't qualify for a productive price range, it doesn't help us accomplish our goals. So Q in the FHA 100%, it can be much more universal because it allows much higher debt to income ratios and much lower credit scores. And then that option has up to a 5% down payment option, meaning it'll cover all of your down payment, plus give you a subsidy for closing costs. Again, doesn't cover every penny of closing costs, but that's a great opportunity for people who only have the down payment and are trying to ask for seller concessions, which you just mentioned is almost a no-go in this market.
And so is there any real downside to any of these programs?
Yes. So the two downsides primarily are, well, especially with the FHA 100%, you're typically going to receive worse terms of no money down. That's not always the case. MAP is a great program. There's no mortgage insurance and you're wetting it with the Oregon bonds. You're getting great terms as well. But barring that, usually you have a little higher interest rate, or which is always the case almost, you have lower debt ratios, meaning someone putting 20% down is going to be granted much more liberal qualifying debt ratios than someone with no money down. So that's the limitation, right? But if that's, well, we don't have the down payment to work with, then it's a great way to still get into a home.
Who do you feel like are the perfect candidates for these programs as far as, credit reserves?
Yeah,
Is there anything that you can speak to that would put people in sort of a better position to be able to qualify?
that's a great question. So the credit threshold for these programs you want to strive for is 640. 640 or better. Below 640, you could technically still do the Oregon bond, but that it basically eliminates all the down payment assistance programs and or 100% financing. So we want to strive for 640. In terms of the reserves, it's interesting. The FHA 100% requires no reserves. I happen to think it's a bad idea to purchase a home with zero savings. So often I'm having a conversation with people who they technically have the down payment, but that would wipe out all their savings. I just think that's a really precarious position to put yourself in. So maybe they would be a better position for 100% financing and retain the savings, even though FHA doesn't require any reserves. MAP does require 2 months of reserves. That means 2 months worth of mortgage payments and savings after closing. So that would be a good thing to strive for, even if it's not required by that program.
And how do you feel like this differs of something like, USDA, which of course we know is 100% financing program. And of course, with USDA, there's only really USDA declared areas are eligible, basically rural areas.
Right.
And those are ones that you work with as well, I'm assuming.
Yes. So it's a great question. So USDA is only for eligible areas. However, that being said, much of Clackamas County qualifies for USDA. Basically, a lot of areas outside of Oregon City and almost everywhere west of Hillsborough and Washington County qualifies for USDA. So there are some really viable areas out there. And USDA is 100% financing, gives you really nice terms. And then you can wed USDA with Oregon bond as well. That's a really nice benefit package. So you could take 100% financing in USDA combined, for instance, with the below market interest rate of the Oregon bond or the closing cost assistance. And so that is the best of both worlds, if you will. The only limitation, the counterpoint to that is USDA does have the most conservative debt ratios of all loan programs out there. Not just because of the bond, it has nothing to do with the bond, just because that's how USDA functions.
And what about income limitations in either direction, whether an income threshold, whether minimum or maximum on any of the programs that we're talking about?
That's a great question. And it's a nuanced question because every single program has its own different income limits. So for instance, the FHA 100% has fairly liberal income limits up to 130,000, slightly over 130,000. So as long as you make under that, you can qualify for that program. Versus MAP, there's two actually forms of MAP. There's MAP 80 and MAP 100, not to get too much in the weeds, but it just has to do with what funding is available at the time. And MAP 80 is subject to 80% AMI, area median income. And that's a much more conservative number. That for a one-person household, you're more like 50,000. So you can see the range of these income limits. The Oregon bond's kind of in the middle, in low 6 digits. So there are different income limits for those different programs.
Do you really feel like that most people can qualify for at least something somewhere? Like that most people, like if they have over a certain amount of credit score, are going to be able to kind of put something together if they need to?
In my experience, especially since most people are going to have over 640. 640 is fairly low score, low threshold to qualify for the 100% financing or down payment assistance. And then especially like the FHA 100% going up to 130,000, and it's applicant income only, which is very critical because some programs look at total household income, but applicant income only means I could have a dual person household together to make over 130,000. But if one of them alone makes under 130, they can go on the application alone and you preserve the other person's first time homebuyer status, maybe for another purchase in the future, which could be very strategic at any rate. And so, yes, even if the household makes over 130, there may be an opportunity to still qualify for one of these programs.
So walk me through if someone comes to you. I've
Mhm.
sent someone over to you and they are interested in down payment assistance programs. I actually just did that yesterday, by the way.
Okay.
And let's just say they need a roadmap
Mhm.
because they're not quite at that 640 threshold. What does
Right.
that conversation look like with you once you've sort of pulled credit, and what does that conversation look like?
Meaning, so they're not at 640 now?
They're not at 640, right?
Okay.
Maybe they need a little bit of credit help. What is it that you would recommend at that point?
Sure. So a couple things. So we can do a purchase loan all the way down to 600, and the Oregon bond is still allowed down to 600. So they do have a small down payment, even 3.5%. They can still take advantage of like a really below market interest rate or the cash grant portion of the Oregon bond. So there's that. But if they truly don't have any funds for down payment, or that's what we need, then there's a couple things we're going to do. So there's two broad credit issues. There's short-term issues, and then there's more systematic issues. So short-term issues are largely maxed out credit cards. And when I pull someone's credit, I'm automatically going to do our software scans for any actions the client can take in the short term to raise scores. Pay XYZ credit cards down to XYZ balance, your score will go up to between 660 and 670. It's fairly accurate, right? So if I see an opportunity to do that, right away, we'll send them those instructions on how to do that. And then we can do what's called a rapid rescore. The systematic things are things like I legitimately missed payments. I had a bankruptcy, foreclosure. Those are systematic issues. So often credit repair can help those, because what credit repair will do is they're going to, I know it sounds strange, but they're going to try to attack those legitimate negative things using the Fair Credit Reporting Act, because if the creditor will not or cannot respond asking to prove that that debt was theirs, it's wiped away per the Fair Credit Reporting Act. So that's how a lot of professional credit repair companies work.
Do you feel like people who maybe don't have any credit issues, people who
Mhm.
do have money in reserves, they just
Mhm.
don't necessarily want to put in a big down payment just because they'd rather keep their cash liquid? Do people of means also apply for these programs?
Sometimes there can be very strategic reasons to do that. The counterpoint to that is this market, Aubrey, right? Like, so let me answer your question and say the counterpoint of the market is the competitive factor, right? But a lot of times, myself included, when I bought my first, second, or third home, I purposely used 100% financing, even though I had the down payment, because I wanted to pursue other opportunities, right? If I didn't use a down payment, but and the money I would have used as a down payment, I used to build a basement apartment or an ADU that rented for $1,000 or $1,500 a month. That's a much better upside than saving a small amount of mortgage insurance or whatnot. So I think there can be a greater opportunity if you have a vision of what you'd otherwise do with the down payment. The counterpoint to that, and you'll totally agree with me, it's more in your wheelhouses. Lower or no down payment is going to be viewed less competitive than larger down payments. So
It is. And in part, that is due to the fact that when listing agents like myself see very low down payments or no down payments, then the onus is really on the appraisal. And that
mhm.
if there's concerns about the appraisal and people don't have money to bring in the difference between an appraised amount and a purchase price, which is
Right.
happening all the time here, as
Yeah,
people waiving that, is the lower the down payment, the harder it is to get accepted. And I
sure.
mean, that said, on, personally, in the last 125 houses I've sold, I've actually only had one appraisal that came in low. And
Yeah.
that was in a house that was $55,000 over asking, and it appraised for $52,000 over asking.
Wow.
So it's not, I think people are really worried about that on the listing and the buyer side. But the reality is that for the most part, appraisers are keeping up with the market. But
Mhm.
that said, the less skin you have in the game, the harder it is to compete.
Yep.
Sure.
It's true. And I'll be the first one. I want to set that expectation with people. Like, I definitely don't pretend that having no money down makes you more competitive or as competitive with the down payment. But the only perspective I'd lend is that, offering a lot of these programs and helping people with them, at any given time, we have a half a dozen people who did successfully get in a contract with no money down or 100% financing. So it's possible. And if that's the only way
Well,
you
we
can,
have one of those. We have one of those right now, right? A
right.
detached home
Yeah.
using one of these programs in Hillsborough,
Right.
arguably one of the most competitive markets.
Sure.
But there are strategies that good agents can use to help people get into homes.
Right.
Um, are there any limitations on these programs as far as, does it have to be a detached home? Can it be a townhouse or a condo or manufactured home? Do they have those sort of restrictions?
Each program is a little different. So Oregon Bond and MAP can be townhome, condo, manufactured home. It's a great opportunity for manufactured home because almost all loan programs have higher rate for manufactured homes, sometimes substantially so, because they're viewed as more risky than stick built. So those programs are great for manufactured home. The FHA 100% financing is not compatible with manufactured homes, but it can be used on a duplex. And that's a rarity, but I just want to put that out there. 100% financing on duplex would be fun to help someone with. And that can also be used for FHA approved condos as
Mhm.
well as townhomes. So anyways, it just depends on the program, what limitations are in terms of
And all of these programs are used for primary residence.
all of them. Yes,
Yeah.
all primary residents. And when you sign disclosure saying you're buying a primary residence, means you're intending to live there for 12 months. The day after that, you could turn around and turn it into a rental and purchase another primary residence.
So in the case of a duplex, if you were to buy a duplex and you lived on
Mhm.
one side, then that still would count as a primary residence under even the FHA guidelines?
Absolutely. And we love helping people do that because I own a duplex and a triplex myself. They've been the best investments my family ever made. And we bought them as a primary residence. I would not have been able to purchase those properties if I had to put 20 or 25% down. Right. So it's a great way to position yourself to build wealth later on. And then what it also does is addresses affordability and pre-approvability. Because if I have a duplex and I'm going to live in one side, then all loan programs allow me to count the rent from the other unit as my qualifying income. So on average, you'll qualify for $50,000 to $100,000 more on a duplex than you would on a single family residence.
Because you can
And
use
if
the
you have
rental
that,
income as income.
exactly. And then if you have that rent coming in from the other side, that may make your net mortgage payment, substantially less than even a home that it doesn't even exist anymore, like a $200,000 home or something. So it adjusts the affordability side of the equation too.
They don't exist anymore, not
Yeah,
anywhere. And
unfortunately.
it's interesting because Portland is still the most affordable metro market on the West Coast.
Yes.
Because we've got Seattle and you've got Bend and you've got San Francisco and, San Diego and all of those areas. And yet still, the starter home market has just increased to the point where it has made it impossible for some people to think about getting into that starter home market because of the down payment, because of the closing costs. Because
Yeah.
if your down payment is 3.5 or 5%, that's a
Mhm.
different story when it's 250,000 as opposed to when it's 400,000. It's vastly
Right.
different. And unfortunately, what happens is people are trying to save, save, save. And in the meantime, the market has gone up so much that they have literally they have just canceled themselves out of the market, because by the time they're ready and saved up all of that money,
Right.
that price point doesn't exist anymore. And at
Correct.
the kind of percentages you're talking about, 2%, 2.1, 2.7, et cetera. I mean, it's almost like free money. And the interest rates are already really low, just
Mhm.
generally speaking, but that's really below market value, those sort of down
Yeah.
payment programs.
Yep.
Yeah, it really
Yep.
is.
So there's good opportunities out there, guys.
Are there any other programs that you wanted to highlight? I mean, these are the ones that I know about as well. Is there anything else that you wanted to cover?
Just very, very briefly, Gresham has its own down payment assistance program. So if you're eligible first-time home buyer, I can't go into those nuances now. That could be a whole nother half-hour video, but it has its own eligibility requirements. But if you qualify for that, it provides up to $20,000 down payment assistance, and that also can be wedded with the Oregon Bond and or MAP. So that's a great opportunity if you're buying in Gresham. And then Beaverton has its own down payment assistance program called Beaverton Inhabit. It has a weird quirk that you already have to live in Beaverton. So the Gresham program, you can be inbound, moving from anywhere. The Beaverton program, you have to already be a renter in Beaverton, but that's up to 25,000. So I just thought I'd mention those. And then lastly, there's a huge amount of housing finance agencies in town, like CASA and different things like this. There's actually over a dozen of them, and they get one-off fundings all the time. And that's not something your lender necessarily brokers for you. You need to approach those housing agencies, and you could reserve down payment assistance, but that can be used in conjunction with some of these other programs. I just want to mention that.
And my last question, I guess,
Mhm.
is are all of these programs still funded during COVID, after COVID? There's another program, Chinoa, that,
Mhm.
sort of comes in and out of funding depending on what they have. Do you have any sort of sense on that?
Well, they do come and go. So we used to have a program or two that doesn't exist now during COVID. It was suspended. Um, that being said, the vast majority of programs we've always had that we've already gone over have been fully funded. Like the Oregon Bond has run out of funding for almost a half a decade now, so it's been well funded. And the Oregon Bond is actually rolling out another down payment assistance program later this year. So maybe we'll come back and do a video on that, and that will be conventional base with
Mm.
higher income limits and maybe even more upside than the FHA 100%. So I think we have a lot that's still there and more to come.
I love that there are options. That I think that people feel like the real estate market is just for the wealthy, but
Mhm.
investing in real estate is such a solid investment. And I love that it's open to everybody, especially with the programs that you mentioned. So I very much appreciate the conversation. Vince, if you can please end the conversation with just your contact information so that when people have questions and want to chat with you, that they have a place where they can go.
Great. I appreciate it. Vince Kingston, Guild Mortgage. My number is 971-221-8525. Email is vkingston@guildmortgage.net. And it was a pleasure chatting with you today, Aubrey.
Thank you, Vince. Have a good rest of your day, and
You
thanks so much
too.
for
Take
watching.
care.
Thank you.
Bye.